the reappearance of the Master, the Savior, the Avenger, Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Askari, recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli. قال سيدنا ومولانا أبو عبد الله الحسين من كان باذلا فينا مهجته وموطنا على لقاء الله نفسه فليرحل معنا فإني راحل غدا إن شاء الله. The eve of Ashura is inextricably linked with God's proof and the Imam of our time. Part of that has to do with the fact that you cannot disentangle that tragic moment in history, the day of Ashura, from the cosmic event of the return of the Savior. These two are inseparable. You might have heard that when the 12th Imam, may Allah hasten his reappearance and bring relief to his blessed heart, when he returns, he will have a motto, a slogan. The flags, the standards that will be waved by his companions, by his supporters, will have an insignia. And the insignia will read, Ya Litharatil Hussain. There is something about these two events where if Ashura was the beginning, the day of the return of the Imam will be the end. They're inextricably linked. Because it was on the day of Ashura that justice was trampled upon by the hooves of the horses. Justice was slaughtered by the banks of the river Euphrates. Justice was murdered on the plains of Karbala. And for humanity to survive, for us sentient beings to continue to exist, that justice has to be restored. The Mahdi has to come. God's promise has to be fulfilled. So tonight is about the 12th Imam as much as it's about Imam al-Hussein, his grandfather. But there's another reason for that. Because of what the Imam is going through tonight. You see fellow believers in a state of mourning and sadness. You yourself are in a state of sadness. Our scholars, our ulama, they're all crying. Some of them are going through hysterical tears, uncontrollable emotions. Now imagine what Imam al-Zaman is going through. In fact, we don't need to imagine, because the Imam himself says in Ziyaratul Nahiya, فَلَئِنْ أَخَّرَتْنِ الدُّهُورِ وعاقني عن نصرك المقدور ولم أكن لمن حاربك محاربا ولمن نصب لك العداوة مناصبا لأندبنك صباحا ومساء ولأبكين عليك بدل الدموع دما حسرة عليك وتلهفا لما دهاك وتحسرا حتى أموت بلوعة المصاب وغصة الاكتئاب. What is the Imam telling us here? He's giving us glimpses of what he's going through tonight. He says that now that I have missed out on the opportunity to be with you, to defend you, to protect you, O grandfather, Ya Aba Abdullah. Now that God has destined for me not to be on the plains of Karbala on the 10th of Muharram in the year 61 after the hijrah of the Prophet, now that that is the case, and I couldn't defend you, I couldn't fight your enemies, I couldn't protect you and your camp, then I will spend every morning and every night by shedding tears, such that my eyes will run out of tears and I will shed fresh blood out of my eyeballs. The Imam then says, this part many of you have heard, you've read, but listen to what the Imam says after that. بِأَبِي أَنْتَ وَأُمِّي يَا حُجَّةَ ابْنَ الْحَسَنِ يَا بَقِيَّةَ اللَّهِ آجَرَكَ اللَّهِ. He says, حَتَّى أَمُوتَ بِلَوْعَةِ الْمُصَابِ. I will cry and mourn until I die from grief and from depression. Which probably means that had it not been for the fact that Allah has chosen to preserve the life of our Imam, he would surely have died from crying tonight. Had it not been for the fact that the Creator of the world has a plan for the 12th Imam, which is why he's kept him all this time, the Imam would die of grief. Ajarakallah, baqiyatullah. So tonight is about the 12th Imam, which is why I have a proposition, my dear brothers and sisters. Please heed this, listen to this, try and apply it. Let's all do it together. Let's make it go viral, this idea. Let us start from tomorrow. And for the next 40 days, it's not too much to bear, it's simple, it's easy, everybody can do it. For the next 40 days, starting on the day of Ashura and ending on the day of Arba'een, let us recite Ziyarat Ashura on a daily basis. If you recite the Ziyarah as prescribed in Mafatihul Jinan, with all of the etiquettes, with all of the extra acts, like reciting 100 salams, 100 la'na, then 100 salams, followed by the dua that comes right after it, known as dua alqamah. If you do all of this together, it takes less than an hour. Out of the 24-hour busy schedules of our lives, I'm sure we can spare an hour. If you can't do all of that, as a family, as a group of friends, to get together, if you can't do it, just recite the ziyarah in its plain and simple form. Why do I say that? Because most of the time when we pray for the return of the Imam, we immediately think of our problems that the Imam is going to resolve, which is such a selfish thing to do if you think about it. I want the Imam to return because I'm suffering, because I'm in pain. How many times have we actually sat down and prayed for the Imam himself, for relief to be brought to his broken heart? Which is what we're trying to do here, brothers and sisters. 40 days of Ziyarat Ashura. I swear in the name of the glorious Creator of the universe, if you do that with a pure intention, your life will be transformed. But more than your life being transformed, maybe, just maybe, our hope is that that will bring final relief to the Imam of our time. Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam says in a hadith that's been, listen carefully, brothers and sisters. He says in this hadith that's been narrated in Kamaluddin by Shaykh Saduq as well as others, he says that the Bani Israel, they did something, I don't want to get into it now, but they did something that invoked God's wrath. And they were cursed by Allah and sentenced to 400 years of bewilderment and exodus, of being lost in the desert. God's sentence was how many years? 400. In the 230th year of this sentence, So after 2 centuries, they'd had enough. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam tells us, this is a lesson. The Imam isn't trying to tell us a story. He says that in the year 230, the Israelites had had enough. They'd suffered through so many tyrants and despots and so forth. And so they got together and they did the most beautiful thing they could think of doing, which is, let's plead with Allah, let's pray to God. We've tried and we've tried, but we can't fix it. Look at the world around you, brothers and sisters. Where do you even start from? All the suffering, all the pain, all the poverty, all the carnage, all the death. Where do you even start? How can you fix all of this? I'm not saying that you should stop trying. I'm not saying that we shouldn't help those who need our help. But there comes a point when you are desperate, when you recognize just how weak and ineffective you are, that you are persecuted, that you're oppressed. So Imam Sadiq says that the Israelites got together and they said, let's pray. Let's ask God to intervene. And so they went out into the desert and they prayed. فَضَجُّوا وَبَكَوْا, Imam Sadiq says. They didn't just pray, they cried. They begged. They screamed, asking Allah for help. They did that for 40 days. On the 40th day, Allah sent Musa to go and save them. All it took was 40 days of genuine, deep prayer, begging Allah for relief. Then Imam Sadiq said the following. He said, وَهَا أَنْتُمْ كَذَلِكَ. And you're exactly the same. If you pray hard enough, if you're serious, if you make these supplications and du'as, if you recognize your inherent deficiency and poverty, then Allah will bring about farajuna, our relief will be brought to us. وَإِلَّا, if you don't do that, the Imam said, يَنْتَهِ الْأَمْرُ إِلَى مُنْتَهَا. Then nature has to take its course. And by nature having to take its course, the Imam is telling us there will be more suffering, more pain, more death, more carnage, more misery, more deviation, more infighting, more discord. You want relief to be brought to you faster? More importantly, do you want relief to be brought to the Imam of the time, God's proof, Baqiyatullah? Let's do this starting tomorrow. And if we do this on a global scale, believe me, we will see results. The Imam is telling you this, not Mahdi Modarresi. So inshallah, starting tomorrow, Ziyarat Ashura, look it up, read it, do it with a pure intention for the hastening and the relief and the victory of the Imam of the time. Recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. In the statement that I read at the beginning, it's a quote taken from the same sermon that we've been quoting on and off for the last 10 days or so. The same sermon that the Imam delivered as he was about to leave the holy city of Mecca in the direction of Kufa. The Imam says at the very end of that sermon, he says, Allah. Here's an announcement everybody needs to hear. And this applies to all of us here tonight. He says, أَلَا مَنْ كَانَ بَاذِلًا فِينَا مُهْجَةً. Allahu Akbar. It sends shivers down my spine, just imagining as the Imam is speaking this, saying this physically to those who are listening to him. And we are among them. If, the Imam says, you satisfy these two conditions, then فَلْيَرْحَلْ مَعَنَا فَإِنِّي رَاحِلٌ مُصْبِحًا إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهِ. Because tomorrow morning I'm leaving, the Imam says. If you want to join me, you have to satisfy these two conditions. What are they? This is what I want to talk about tonight. Two critical prerequisites for joining Imam Hussain, for boarding his ark, for being with him and achieving victory in this world as well as the next. Before I tell you what they actually are, a lot of people wanted to be with Imam al-Hussein, but failed miserably. I'll give you just a couple of examples. One of them was a man by the name of Ad-Dhahhak al-Mashriqi. Have you heard that name before? He is one of the reporters who later told us part of the narrative of Ashura. Again, if you go back to the series of classes that I did last year under the title Ashurology, where I talk about how we receive the events of Ashura, how do we know the narrative of Karbala, his name also comes up. Ad-Dhahhak al-Mashriqi was a person, very long story short, he was with Imam al-Hussein, perhaps all the way from Mecca even. He came with the Imam, but he was half-hearted about joining the Imam. The Imam had been talking about death, about martyrdom, about these sorts of things, and this guy was like me, thinking the Imam is going to go to Kufa, he's going to go and topple the regime, and probably he's going to end up becoming the Khalifa, and maybe I'll get a piece of the cake. And so he joins the Imam, but not fully committed to his cause. Wal-'iyadhu billah. So he told Imam al-Hussein, look, I'll come along with you, but there's a condition, which is that if I realize that you're going to die anyway, then I'm not going to waste my life, essentially. I will defend you. But if you are going to get killed regardless, then I don't want to die. Is that okay? The Imam said to him, sure. The Imam welcomes everybody. But of course, the filtration has to happen. So then, fast forward to the day of Ashura, the first ambush, 40 of Imam Hussein's companions had been killed or injured. Some reports say that not a single member of the camp of Imam al-Hussein was not injured after that first ambush. What was the ambush? It was arrows being shot in the direction of the camp of Imam al-Hussein. Simply with arrows. The dust settled, 40 martyrs, that's half the camp of Imam al-Hussein. Ad-Dhahhak came to the Imam. He said to him, remember our deal? The Imam said, yes. He said, am I free to go? The Imam said, yes. The Imam doesn't want to force anybody. He doesn't want to even get someone to help him when he's half-hearted. The Imam wants purity. He wants only the best of the best. And so he said to him, of course, you're free to go. But how are you going to go? The enemy has surrounded us. There's no horses. He said, no, I've got more horse lined up. He always had that plan B, that exit strategy. Again, not fully committed to Imam al-Hussein and defending him. The Imam said to him, you're free to take your horse and leave. He rode his horse and took off. In my humble view, he's a cursed man because he saw what Imam al-Hussein was faced with, and yet he failed to defend him. At the very least, he is a loser of the highest caliber. Imagine, I don't know how long he lived after Imam al-Hussein, but imagine, had he been in the camp of Imam al-Hussein, Imam al-Sadiq today would teach us to say, As-salam, bi-abi antum wa ummi ya ansar Rasulillah. He would be among the most luminous stars in the galaxy. But even though he wanted it, but he didn't really want it. That's one example. The other example is At-Tarimmah ibn Adi. At-Tarimmah was a great man. I mentioned him just a couple of nights ago. Remember? The messenger who went on behalf of Amir al-Mu'mineen to the court of Muawiyah, mopped Muawiyah with the floor. Great man, no question about his integrity, his ethics. And yet, Imam al-Hussein encountered him. He was coming out of Kufa. Imam al-Hussein was going towards Kufa. The Imam said to him, I'm heading towards Kufa. There's going to be a showdown. There's going to be a battle. Join me. At-Tarimmah said to the Imam, I've got a better idea. You see, that's one of our problems, brothers and sisters. We present ideas to Islam, to religion. No. I know this is what God says, but I've got a better idea. No, this is too archaic. This is too old. this is defunct. This is like old school thinking. It's a new world now. It's the 21st century. We've got rovers on Mars. So we've got better ideas now. The Quran says one thing. And these so-called intellectuals, they present us with ideas and say, oh, no. But this is different. We're living in a different world now. So throw away Islam and its teachings because this dude with his goatee thinks that he has got a better idea to present to humanity than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed to us. So, At-Tarimmah, he didn't quite catch what Imam Hussain was offering him. He said to the Imam, I have a better idea. Why don't you come with me? We'll go to our tribe. I've got 20,000 people willing to fight for you. And we'll all defend you. And we can actually win this, Ya Aba Abdullah. But you see, it's not about your ideas or your proposals. The Imam is telling you, let's go. The Imam doesn't want the 20,000 soldiers. Again, he only wants the best of the best. He wants these individuals who will be among those who return in the Raj'ah. They'll be brought back to life to fight with Imam al-Zaman. These aren't just foot soldiers. These aren't just people who volunteered so they could get some kind of benefit out of this. The Imam said to him, no, I will continue down my journey. At-Tarimmah said, if that's the case, then I will go. I've bought some food for the winter for my family. I'm going to go deliver it to them and I'll catch up with you. The Imam said, I'm afraid you won't make it. I'll catch up with you. You see, Imam al-Hussain says in that sermon, I am leaving tomorrow morning. Don't say I'll catch up. Don't say one day, because as I said before, that day will never come. The day will never come. It's like someone who's trying to learn how to swim, right? And they're really committed. They really want to learn. What do? They jump into the deep end and they start swimming. You might say that I'm surrounded with problems. I can't focus right now on avoiding this haram that I'm addicted to, for instance, or on doing this wajib that I'm supposed to do. I can't because I've got too many things going around me, right? That's like someone who's in the water trying to learn how to swim. Instead of thinking of all of these problems as obstacles, use them to float. Use the water to float above the water. Imam al-Hussain doesn't want people who want to catch up later. He wants you to be fully committed to it right here, right now. So, what are the two conditions that the Imam presents to us? And again, you'd have to be committed to the extent that some of the companions of Imam al-Hussain were. Anas ibn al-Kahil al-Asadi or Anas ibn al-Harith al-Asadi. Both names have been mentioned. This man from the tribe of Bani Asad. Subhanallah, Bani Asad had the best of the best companions of Imam al-Hussain, as well as the worst of the worst, like Harmala. Anas ibn al-Kahil al-Asadi, his story is incredible. On the day of Ashura, he was an elderly man. He was a companion of Rasulullah. Elderly to the point where he had to wear a headband just to lift his eyebrows up and see clearly. Imam al-Hussain came to him. As soon as he saw him, he cried. Imagine you see this elderly man who's dressed up like a soldier. He's in his 90s. Imam al-Hussain cried. He said to him, Ya Shaykh, why are you doing this to yourself? I relieve you of your pledge. You can leave, you can go. He said to him, Ya Aba Abdullah, how could I do that when I heard Rasulullah myself? Al-Bukhari mentions this hadith, by the way. He said, I heard Rasulullah, one day you were a toddler, you came and you sat in your grandfather's lap. Rasulullah looked at you and then he said, Inna ibni hadha yuqtalu fi ardin yuqalu laha Karbala. This son of mine is going to get killed one day in a land called Karbala. فَمَنْ شَهِدَ الْمَوْقِفَ فَلْيَنْصُرْهُ. Whoever witnesses that, You should support him. You should help him. When he heard that hadith, he set out, obviously after Rasulullah, after Amir al-Mu'mineen, he then looked for the land called Karbala. He went there. It was a stretch of desert, desolate, nothing in it. He settled in Karbala. He set up camp. He put up a tent. He lived there for God knows how many years in anticipation of the day of Ashura. That's how you wait for the Imam. That's how you anticipate his return. Muhammad ibn Sa'd al-Basri, who was a scholar, early bibliographer and biographer in the Sunni faith, he has a book called At-Tabaqat al-Kubra, known as Tabaqat ibn Sa'd. This man mentions this story. He says a man by the name of Al-Uryan ibn al-Haytham quoted, he would tell the story. He said that my father and I would sometimes go out into the desert to hunt or to just travel. And he says every time we walked past this area known as Karbala, there was this man who lived there, and he didn't seem to have anything like a business or animals or anything like that, or a farm. He just lived there in the middle of the desert. So my father once said to him, "Why are you always here?" He said, "Because I heard Rasulullah say that in Karbala my grandson will be killed. And so I've settled here waiting for that day. I don't want to miss this train. I don't want to miss this opportunity." And so Al-Uryan ibn al-Haytham says that one day we heard that Al-Hussain ibn Ali had been killed. My father said, "Let's go and see what's happening. Let's find that man from Bani Asad." He said, "Kana Asadiyan." So we went over there, we saw the bodies, and sure enough, one of them, وَإِذَا بِالْأَسَدِيِّ مَقْتُولٍ. There's a difference between Al-Dhahhak al-Mashriqi and Anas ibn al-Harith al-Asadi. Which one am I? Which one am I? So Imam al-Hussain says, I don't want to take too much of your time. It's the eve of Ashura. It's the night of weeping and crying and sending our condolences to the Imam of the time. But I want to highlight these two critical conditions because, again, you don't get this opportunity every day. فَإِنِّي رَاحِلٌ غَدًا إِنشَاءَ. The Imam says, tomorrow this ship is about to set sail. The Imam says two things if you want to join us. Number one, بَاذِلًا فِينَا مُهْجَةً. You must be someone willing to give your all to the Imam. Badilan is to give, to offer. Fina, in our way, in our cause. Muhjatah, which means his heart. We must be willing, brothers and sisters, to give in the way of Imam al-Hussain. Sure, money is a part of it, yeah. That's a very good litmus test of whether or not you're serious and loyal. Someone comes to Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. He says to him, Ya ibn Rasulullah, I fear death. I'm terrified of death. The Imam said, of course you're terrified of death, because you've saved up all your money for this world, haven't sent anything to the next, into the hereafter, and you're obviously loyal to your money. You're attached to your money. And so you'd like to stay in this world because this is what you've built for yourself. You haven't built much for yourself in the afterlife. If you send more of your wealth into the next world, then you won't fear it as much. You won't hate it as much. In fact, you'll look forward to going there and receiving your investment after it's matured, after it's been amplified by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Money is a big part of it. Helping those in need, especially within your own family, is a very big part of it. If you happen to live in a country, in a place where you're comfortable, relatively speaking, and there are those among your own family, your own arham, who are suffering, you'll be questioned about this on the Day of Judgment. How do you expect to join Imam al-Hussain, to join the 12th Imam, if you don't want to give your own money? There's a hadith in which someone comes to Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. He says to him, Ya ibn Rasulullah, we have 30,000 soldiers willing to lay their lives and give their blood in your way. The Imam said, are these people, these brothers in faith, do they help each other financially? Does a brother take from his brother's money without even having to ask him, and his brother is okay with it? He said, no, obviously not. Who does that? The Imam said, you think they'd be more generous with their blood than with their money? Do you think they'll actually stand a chance in the battlefield without making a run for it? So money is a big part. Yes, we need those who are in poverty to be helped. We need the institutions to be supported. We need these gatherings and these majalis to be supported. Yeah. A very good first litmus test for your loyalty to the Ahlul Bayt is how much you give in their way, to honor them, to glorify them, to mention their names, and to ensure that their names are alive. That's a big part. The problem we have, brothers and sisters, is that we don't realize that, okay, it's fine. You want to run around and squander half your life trying to make money? Nobody's saying that that's haram if you make it from halal sources. But you also have to pay 20% of that money isn't yours to begin with. It belongs to Allah, it belongs to the Imam of the time. And tampering with that, accessing that money without giving the 20% to the Imam of the time is you accessing the money that belongs to the Imam. That's theft, that's stealing in broad daylight. Khums is something that a lot of people, when it comes to salat, hajj, fasting in the month of Ramadan. But the subject of khums is somehow touchy, it's somehow sensitive. So that's part of it. Man kana badilan fina. You have to give. But the Imam also says, Man kana badilan fina muhjata. In other words, the money is part of it, but really what the Imam wants from you and I is our heart. Part of dua or ziyarat al-arba'in is you say the following. Those of you who have been to ziyarat al-arba'in, you'll remember this part. We say, Labbayka da'i Allah. I am at your beck and call. I am responding to your call. Who? Da'i Allah, the one who calls unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In kana lam yujibka badani hina istighathatik wa lisani hina istinsarik. If my body wasn't there physically to defend you when you asked for help, and my tongue wasn't there to respond to your call, فَقَدْ أَجَابَكَ قَلْبِي وَسَمْعِي وَبَصَرِي. Then today I am responding to you with my heart, with my ears, with my eyes. In other words, Imam Hussain, the 12th Imam, his heir, his successor, he wants your heart and he wants it in full. Again, you can't be half-hearted about this. Let's not be Dhahak al-Mashriqis here. He wants all your heart. One of our scholars, Rahmatullah alayhi, passed away a few years ago, Sayyid Murtada al-Askari. There's a video of his, he does an interview, and then he says that when I was young, he died when he was well into his 90s, maybe over 100 years old. He said, when I was very, very young, must have been about 15, 14 years of age, just reached my puberty, he says, I went to the shrine of Askariyin in Samarra, Imam al-Hadi and Imam al-Hasan al-Askari, and the house of the 12th Imam. He says, I went there, and I used my index finger to write this on my forehead. He said, I wrote, Waqfun lillah. Have you ever been to one of those shrines where you pick up the books, Mafatih al-Janan, for example, and on the first page or on the cover, it says Waqfun lillah, there's a stamp? What does that mean? It means this is dedicated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which means that you can't take it out of the shrine. You can't use it for any other purpose but the thing that it was meant to serve, which is to read du'as, to recite supplications, to make prayers, that sort of thing. Waqfun lillah. You can never use it for any other reason. He says, I wrote on my forehead, Waqfun lillah. From this day onward, I am devoted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he said, and until now, I don't think I've ever used me for any other purpose than that for which it was intended. Meaning that I truly devoted myself. I only did the things that I knew would please the Imam of the time. And I avoided all the things that I knew would anger or upset the Imam of the time. Brothers and sisters, the Imam wants your heart. He wants you to devote yourself. Make the Imam of the time the axis of your life. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have fun, that you can't get married and have kids and have a job and that sort of thing. Of course you can do all those things. But with every step that you take, ask yourself, would this please my Imam or displease my Imam? It's not too hard. And it doesn't derail all your plans. When you're about to choose your career path, would this please my Imam or not? When you're about to choose a life partner, would this please my Imam or not? When you're about to travel, would this please my Imam or not? You know what happens if you do that? You'll still go on that vacation that you crave so much. But when you go on the vacation, you will only do the things that will please the Imam. You won't do anything that's haram, number one. Number two, you will try to do things to fill your time with things that please the Imam. I have a friend who said that when I go on a vacation, I take a very good religious book along with me, and we have like a book club with my family every day. Yeah, they can go and swim, they can have all of these activities, whatever, but we also allocate a time for spirituality, for knowledge. Ask yourself every step of the way. فَقَدْ أَجَابَكَ قَلْبِي وَسَمْعِي وَبَصَرِي. Your ears, brothers and sisters, your ears. Do not listen to a single note of that filth. Wallahi, it is nothing but filth. Wallahi, it is demonic to the core. Wallahi al-Ali al-Azim. The music that's released is nothing but corruption. Don't allow the ear that you are dedicating to Imam Hussain to be contaminated with all of this filth. فَقَدْ أَجَابَكَ سَمْعِي وَبَصَرِي. Don't listen to ghibah. Don't, if you see a gathering where ghibah is being practiced, either politely walk away or disrupt the gathering. If you're brave enough, disrupt it. Man up and say that this is wrong. I'm not going to sit through this garbage. And you will see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you things that you never thought were possible. He will open up pathways for you. Wallahi. There is a alim in the holy city of Qom. I might have mentioned this story before. He takes istikhara. But the istikhara he takes is just mind-boggling. He will look at the first word in the verse when he opens the Quran. And before you get a chance to respond or to say anything, he basically tells you your entire plan and your intentions. You say, yeah, like he'd have no idea, no clue who you are, what you're there for, but you're there to take istikhara for a marriage, and he'd be like, yeah, definitely marry her. She's a very good woman. She comes from a good family. Your first child will be a girl, this, that, or the other. So one day, one of my cousins says, I saw him on the street. He was waiting for a taxi or someone to pick him up. He says, so I picked him up in my car. So I said to him, tell me, how did you do this? And he said, look, leave me alone. I really don't have much to share. He said, no, please. If this is going to be something that benefits me, then share it with me. He said, do you know how many gatherings of ghibah I have disrupted before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me this? Do you know how many times I disciplined my own tongue before Allah gave me this? وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهِ. It's a verse in the Quran. وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهِ. You want knowledge? I'm not talking about maths and chemistry here. You want knowledge from Allah? Wattaqullah. Be pious. Fear Allah. So, your ears, your eyes. If this eye is going to have the chance to see the glorious face of God's proof on this earth, it needs to be kept clean. Imagine if for a passing, fleeting scene that I enjoy looking at, I am deprived of ever seeing the Imam of my time. Imagine if in exchange for what? Some petty pleasure that doesn't really give me anything, doesn't give much satisfaction, for 1 second, 2 seconds, or 5 minutes, or whatever. Imagine if because of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deprives me of seeing Imam Hussain in paradise on the Day of Judgment. That even if I enter paradise, I won't be able to access him. Imagine. So, Man kana badhilan fina muhjatah. Imam Hussain says, give me your all, give me your heart, give me your eyes, give me your ears. Then he says, وَمُوَطِّنًا عَلَى لِقَاءِ اللَّهِ نَفْسَهِ. Condition number 2. What does that mean? Muwattin in Arabic means to prepare something. Ala liqa illahi nafsah means to prepare yourselves for meeting with Allah. And what that refers to is to spiritually prepare yourself. For what? For death. For the reappearance of the Imam. Spiritually prepare yourself. Now, let me mention one thing. Time has run out, unfortunately, but this is important. I'll sum up. On the eve of Ashura, you've all heard Imam al-Hussain said to Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas to go and address the enemy camp and to ask them for a reprieve. Ask them to not begin the war on that night and instead wage the battle on the next day. Tactically speaking, this makes absolutely no sense. The Imam would have been much better off, again, tactically speaking, strategically speaking, he would have been much better off to fight in the evening. Why? Number one, it's not as hot as the daytime. They were already deprived of water. They were already thirsty. And so to delay the fight to the next day in itself is tactically incorrect. Secondly, the next day is going to be daytime, the scorching sun, the blazing heat. It'll be much worse. Second reason. Third reason, the enemy was still receiving reinforcements. And so to begin the fight a day before meant that there would be less enemy combatants on the next day. Third reason. Fourth reason, the Imam's camp was bleeding. Supporters, again, had he begun on that night, it would have been better. Fifth reason, at nighttime, Imam al-Hussain has the tactical advantage. Why? Because the bigger camp, 30,000 soldiers, they're easy to spot, even in the dark. But when you have a very small camp of about 120 people, you can maneuver a lot easier. You can fight without being detected. Sixth reason, because at nighttime, it is much harder for the enemies to aim and target individuals. Allahu Akbar. It's a lot harder to see the neck of a 6-month-old infant. Imam al-Hussain could have used that to his advantage. So all of these reasons, and yet the Imam chose to delay the beginning of the battle. Why? He said, because I would like to spend the night in prayer. حَتَّى نُصَلِّي لِرَبِّنَا وَنَدْعُوهُ وَنَسْتَغْفِرُهُ. Because Allah knows that I love to pray. Allah knows that I love to supplicate. Brothers and sisters, Salat, as-salat, as-salat. Let's not make prayer a footnote in our lives. Prayer is essential to who we are as believers. Prayer is the pillar of our faith, brothers and sisters. If your salat is lacking in any way, if you feel like your salat needs improvements, make the commitment tonight that by the grace of Imam al-Hussain, your salat can be fixed, that you would make it a priority once again. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says that as long as a person maintains their salat at their prescribed time, the shaitan is terrified of this person. But the minute they begin to slack off, the minute their salat isn't ideal or isn't practiced or performed at the right times, that's when the shaitan يَتَجَرَّأُ عَلَيْهِ, he will be emboldened and he will try to throw you into the worst of sins. As-salat, brothers and sisters. Again, so much more to share, so much to talk about. But tonight is the eve of Ashura. One of the most difficult tragedies in Karbala was the tragedy of the thirst of Abu Abdullah, the thirst of the camp of Hussein. Let me start 20 years before Ashura. 20 years prior to that day, there was a drought. This was during the reign of Amir al-Mu'mineen. A drought. Cattle were dying, crops were being destroyed, there's no rain. So they come to Amir al-Mu'mineen. They said to him, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, surely you can make a dua, a prayer for rain to come, for this drought to end. The Imam could surely have done that. But you know what he did? He called his son Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. He said, Ya Abu Abdullah, you make the dua. So Imam al-Hussein went out. He made Salatul Istisqa. Then he prayed to Allah. The rain came pouring down to such an extent that all the pots and all the holes in Kufa were filled with fresh water. To the extent that they then came to Amir al-Mu'mineen saying, please pray for the rain to stop. We don't want to lose our crop and our businesses. The prayer was made once again. The rain stopped. They came to Amir al-Mu'mineen. They said to him, we are forever indebted to you, Ya Abul Hasan. We will repay you one day for this favor. Amir al-Mu'mineen said, it was my son who prayed. They said, we will repay Abu Abdullah al-Hussein one day for the water that he brought to us. When did they repay him? On the 7th day of Muharram, when they blocked access to the river for the camp of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. You shameless cowards. It was Imam al-Hussein who prayed for rain, and this is how you repay him. You promise to repay him, to compensate him. بِأَبِي أَنْتَ وَأُمِّي يَا أَبَا عَبْدِ اللَّهِ. Imam Hussein's thirst was only fully encapsulated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't want to mention the entire hadith. When God tells Adam, He mentions the name, عَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. They were taught to Adam. Adam wanted to repent. So Jibreel told him, you have to say the following, Ya Hamidu bihaqqi Muhammad, wa ya Aliyu, wa ya Ali bihaqqi Ali, wa ya Fatiru bihaqqi Fatima, wa ya Muhsinu bihaqqi al-Hasan, wa ya Qadim al-Ihsan, bihaqqi al-Hussein. Forgive me. Adam made that prayer. Then he said to Jibreel, he said to him, Ya Jibreel, when I mentioned those 4 names, I was filled with awe. I was filled with grandeur, with happiness. But the moment I mentioned the name of the 5th one, Hussein, my heart broke. My ears came pouring down. Why is that? What is happening to me? This is one of the litmus tests of believers. Imam al-Hussein himself says, أنا شهيد العبرة ما ذكرني مؤمن إلا بكى. You can test this yourself by saying the following. See if your heart breaks. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Say it with me. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. The believer's heart breaks. Their eyes begin to tear up. And so Adam says to Jibreel, what happened? I mentioned his name and I'm crying without knowing the reason. Jibreel said to him, Innahu waladuk. He's one of your descendants. وَيُصَابُ بِمُصِيبَةٍ تَصْغُرُ عِنْدَهَا الْمَصَائِبِ. Every tragedy will look small compared to what he is going to witness. He said to him, what is going to happen to him? He said, you should see him on that day when he says, Wa atasha, oh the thirst. يُقْتَلُ عَطْشَانًا غَرِيبًا وَحِيدًا فَرِيدًا حَتَّى يَحُولَ الْعَطَشُ بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَ السَّمَاءِ كَالدُّخَانِ. To the point that he will be so lonely, he will be such a stranger, such a helpless person. But it will be the thirst that will be most painful. Then Jibreel says to Adam, the thirst will be such that it will block his view. He can see nothing but smoke between him and the heaven. what happens to the eye when the person is so dehydrated the way Abu Abdullah al-Hussein was, I don't know. But things have been said about how the liquid inside your eye dries up where you can no longer see. Now I say, Ya Abu Abdullah, you're a 57-year-old man, you're an adult. If this is what you suffered, imagine what the thirst did to the 6-month-old infant, Ali al-Asghar. Imam al-Hussein came out. He said, Ya Qawm. Allahu Akbar. The Imam describes how he addressed them on that day. He says, ألا هل من ذاب يذب عن حرم رسول الله. Is there no one to defend the women of God's messenger? ألا هل من مغيث يغيثنا. Is there no one to bring us rescue? ألا هل من خائف ألا هل من موحد يخاف الله فينا. Is there no one who believes in God and therefore fears Allah's wrath and helps us? فخرجت النسوة. The women came out crying بالعويل والبكاء. In other words, Imam al-Hussein had no one to help him except the women and the children. Imam al-Hussein went to take the women back into the camp, into the tents. When he got there, his sister Zainab, Imam al-Hussein saw her. He said, أختاه ناوليني ولدي الرضيع يا حجة ابن الحسن روحي فداك يا بقية الله يا صاحب الزمان. Imam Hussein said, sister, bring me my infant boy لكي أودعه, so that I could bid him farewell. Zainab brought out the infant. She said to him, Ya Abu Abdullah, look into his eyes. He hasn't had any milk for the last 3 days. When a mother doesn't drink water, she doesn't produce any milk, which means that Abdullah al-Radi' was both hungry and thirsty. His eyes had sunk into their sockets. Abu Abdullah took the boy. He decided against fighting. Instead, what he did was he carried Ali al-Asghar. He wore the turban of Rasulullah. He wore the garment, the cape of Rasulullah. He sat not on a horse but on a camel so that everyone could see him. The Imam then headed towards the enemy camp. He raised his voice so everyone could see. Abu Abdullah said to them, Ya Qawm, qad qataltum akhi. You have killed my brother. Wa awladi. You have killed all of my other children. Wa ashabi. Wa lam yabqa illa hadha al-radi'. The only one remaining is this infant. He's only 6 months old. How did Imam al-Hussein carry him? Let me give you a description. When you cut a flower from the stem, the flower stands upright for about a day. Then the next day when you come, you see the flower has withered. Then a few hours later, the stem has no power, no strength to stand upright, to keep the flower or the bud upright. And so it just simply falls like that. Abu Abdullah al-Hussein carried the infant, but the head was dangling. The Imam said, do you not see كيف يتلظى عطشاه? don't you see that he's dying of thirst? Which means that if you feed him, he will die. If you don't feed him, he will still die. Just don't let him die while thirsty. While the head was dangling, they could see the neck. Umar ibn Sa'd called out, Ya Harmala, اقطع نزاع القوم. My camp, my army is split. Some are saying if the Imam has committed a crime, فما ذنب هذا الصغير. My camp is being split in half. End this dispute. Harmala said, أرمي الوالد أم الولد? Do I shoot the father or the son? He said to him, don't you see the whiteness of his neck? فرماه بسهم مثلث. يا صاحب الزمان أجرك الله. He shot him with a three-pronged arrow. فذبحه من الأذن إلى الأذن. He slaughtered him from ear to ear. Abu Abdullah suddenly looked down and blood was gushing from his voice. The Imam caught the blood with his hand. He threw it towards the sky. He called out, Ilahi, in kana hadha yurdik, fakhudh hatta tardah. Nowhere else did this happen. With every tragedy, the Imam had to face it on his own. But this tragedy was so painful that the call was made in heaven. Da'hu ya Hussain. Let him go, ya Aba Abdullah. فَإِنَّ لَهُ مُرْضِعَةً فِي الْجَنَّةِ. He has a nurse waiting for him in paradise. Abu Abdullah cried out, أويلي أويلي تلقى حسين دم الطفل بيده. تلقى حسين دم الطفل بيده. شحال اللي ينذبح بيده وليده. يا حجة ابن الحسن يا صاحب الأمر والزمان. Imam al-Baqir says that not a drop of that blood fell to the ground. Now Imam al-Hussain wants to go back to the camp. But how does he go back? How does he face Zainab? How does he face Rubab? How does he face the girls, the children? They say that some of the children came out. Sukaina came out. Ruqayya came out. Saying, Aba hal saqayta akhi al-radhi' wa ji'ta bibaqi al-ma'. Did you quench our brother's thirst and you brought us the rest of the water? Imagine Abu Abdullah. How is he going to face the boy's mother? Instead, the Imam simply went behind his tent. He dug a hole with the tip of his sword. He then placed his boy in that grave that he had dug. He then covered it with the dust. Allahu Akbar, I didn't want to mention this now, but that boy's body had to be reunited with his father, Abu Abdullah. It's as if the child is saying, oh father, I don't want to be buried alone. I wish to be with you. Which is why on the day of Ashura, they came to that small grave. They dug it up. They brought out Ali al-Asghar. اللهم إنا نسألك وندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم يا الله. Allahumma, I want you to read this out as loud as you can from the deepest recesses of your soul. Allahumma ajjil liwaliyika al-faraj. Allahumma ajjil liwaliyika al-faraj. اللهم عجل لوليك اللهم عجل اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج. اللهم اجعلنا من أصحابه وأعوانه والمستشهدين بين يديه ومقوية سلطانه. اللهم أرض إمام زماننا عنا. اللهم فرج عنه بفرجك. اللهم العن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم العن العصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم العنهم جميعا. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتك. السلام على الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. إلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والعلماء والصالحين والشهداء نهدي لهم ثواب المجلس وثواب سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.